Okay, so we're back for part two of our deep dive into the brand new purchase agreement for our internal Remax Platinum family. Um, so we're just gonna basically pick up where we left off the last one. So I'm gonna share my screen with the document because we finished, I believe, with the closing cost section last time. So we are just about halfway through. So then today should then be the opportunity for us to get through the rest of it. So we get to a fun one right away with real estate taxes, number 14. So we have that seller will pay all prior year's real estate taxes. The current year's real estate taxes will be paid as follows. And so when you fill out your purchase agreement, you're going to have to pick something from these. You cannot just leave this section unchecked. So you have the first option, taxes will be prorated as if paid in advance based on the due date of the taxing authority, commonly used in Washtenaw, Lenawee, Livingston, Wayne, and Oakland counties, and part of Monroe County.
And I did add Genesee in there.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, Genesee. Can't leave us out. Second
Sorry,
option.
that was taken from the title company did not like the tax
Uh,
section that I wrote, so they
uh,
gave me one to put in there. So that was a copy paste.
yeah,
That's
okay. Blaming it on them. I get you.
absolutely.
Well, because also, I mean, another one up here is Shiawassee, because we're pretty close there. Um, so, but obviously, if we, uh, for the agents who deal in these different counties, we shouldn't just rely on this document. We should have some knowledge ourselves. But all right. So the second option is taxes will be prorated as if, oh, here's a typo, paid in the arrears based on the calendar year of the taxing authority, commonly used in Jackson and Ingham counties and parts of Monroe County. Um, so obviously the big difference there is that if you check this box, this first one, where taxes are prorated in advance, then the buyer, who you're filling this out for, is giving money to the sellers at closing for taxes that have been prepaid. If you check this one, then it would be that the seller is supposed to give money to the buyer at closing to go towards a portion of property taxes that have accumulated but not yet been paid because they get paid in arrears. The third option, no proration. Seller will pay the taxes which are due before the date of closing. Buyer will pay the taxes which are due on or after the closing date. Due means the date on which the tax bill first becomes payable. So that is one where there is no party is paying the other any sort of proration. It's just simply, okay, anything that has become due, seller is supposed to pay it before they get to the closing table. But if the next tax bill is 2 weeks later, then that tax bill is going to be the buyer's responsibility. And it doesn't really matter whether those taxes are paid in advance or arrears. It just keeps it kind of clean. I've never actually done a transaction like that though. I mean, it is 90% of the time this first one, every so often though, in Ingham County and such, go in arrears. What do you envision the other being used for?
Right. So there are times where this typically comes into play when you are either in a very competitive situation or possibly when you want concessions that maybe your lender will not let you give. This is another way that you could, in theory, give more money to the seller by saying, you know, um, prorating them however you want, basically. So, or not doing any proration or saying anything that's already paid is theirs, or we'll prorate half of the taxes and not the other half, right?
Okay.
This kind of just gives you that option to put in there whatever you need to make the deal happen for you. I don't think it's going to be used often. The only time I've ever really needed it, I've used it as an addendum during inspection because we only had so much we could get in concessions, so we
Right.
needed to find another way to do that to get more money to the buyer to cover some stuff, and that was one of the ways we did it.
Okay. Because I mean, my thoughts in general, I mean, this is a lot of blank lines to have on this that would almost, very rarely get used, or I would almost have it be other see addendum, but that's me personally, but not a big deal. Only to then get these two lines up here, so the next page starts with 15 at the top, but yeah, not a big concern. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's nice though that it gives us the option rather than it being the boilerplate where you have it set up as a default being paid, prorated based on in advance unless you override it. Here, it forces the agent to make a cognitive, conscious decision. Okay, yes, we're checking this box or this box. Which one is it? Let me verify. Oh, yes, it should be this one. So they're less likely to make a mistake by relying on the boilerplate when they shouldn't be. All right. Down here with the principal residence exemption, the seller represents the PRE is in effect for this property and taxes will be prorated accordingly, or is not in effect for this property and taxes will be prorated accordingly. To be honest, I've seen this in purchase agreements before. I don't really know why it's needed.
So I think this kind of like the paragraph after it serves more of a notice thing for the buyer, as well as for us as agents to check and make sure our buyers are aware of whether or not the current taxes are homesteaded or not. From a buyer's perspective, obviously, if the seller doesn't currently have the taxes homesteaded, I'm prorating at a higher rate than what I'm going to be paying, and I need to take that into consideration.
So if they're not, if it is not in effect, the proration is higher.
Well, because they're paying a higher tax, and I've got to, until I can homestead that property, I've got to pay at that same rate.
Right.
As the buyer. So I might have to pay 6 months of a higher tax until I get to put my residence exemption on there and the new bill comes out with the exemption.
Okay. Okay. Because I thought, the reason to have this sort of sentence in here would be to then also follow it up with, seller will maintain the PRE through the date of closing and not, rescind it. Because I mean, that's one problem, like that's one concern is the seller moves out, gets their next property and files the PRE on that one and rescinds it on the one that, is pending the closing. So having it in the contract that they won't do that, I could see being an important benefit to our buyers. I mean, I guess it should be implied that whatever they're representing at the point of this moment here when they accept the offer, if it is in effect and they sign it, then everything else says that they will keep it in that condition. It's just not explicit for this, PRE, but everything else they're agreeing to keep the property in the same condition. So I guess that clause would apply to the PRE as well.
So I might be wrong. I'd have to look this up, but I thought that there's only certain times of year where they will change whether a property is homesteaded or not, regardless of when you file that. So like if I were to move out of a house today and turn in that this is no longer and rescind my principal residence on this, my current taxes are still going to be exempt until December 31st.
Yeah. But so that's where, because like if it's May,
right,
and And so then they rescind it, and then the closing occurs June 7th, then the buyers are screwed because they've taken that property when after it's made the changeover.
I think removal is on the 31st of December. It stays in effect for the remainder of the year.
Oh, so okay, I thought it was twice a year, but
You can add it twice. There's 2 dates for adding it, June 1st and
Oh.
November 1st.
okay.
But I think if you remove it, that it stays in effect until the December 31st. I want to double check that before anyone quotes me on it. But I think that's what I remember learning.
It's not like this is being recorded for posterity. I mean,
Right, not at all. Not at all.
I'm sure what I'm saying is wildly off as well on this. This is not a strong suit of mine dealing with the PRE, but all right. Buyers advise that the state equalized value of the property, principal residence exemption information, and other real property tax information is available from the appropriate local assessor's office. Buyers should not assume that buyers' future tax bills on the property will be the same as the seller's present tax bills. Under Michigan law, real property tax obligations can change significantly when property is transferred. So that's a cover ourselves. If we should, though, not rely on this sentence as being the only warning to our buyers. We should explicitly tell them, hey, the current taxable value is way down here. The SCV is way up here. When the property transfers, the taxable value is going to jump up to the SCV, if not more. And so, property taxes can also jump up a ton because of that. So if you don't do your job as an agent and explicitly explain that to them, then they are signing a document where they're acknowledging that fact, that they're aware of this, but you still, just for your own good service as an agent, you should have that conversation with your clients.
I don't know if anyone else is keeping an eye on the chat, but Fran had a good comment of she's written an offer where the buyer will prorate taxes at the homestead rate, even if they are not homesteaded. Am I understanding that correctly?
Okay, I like that. All right, special assessments. This is an important one. All special assessments which have been assessed or levied against the property by any public agency, taxing unit, homeowners association, or condominium association shall be paid by the seller. Provided, however, that in the event a special assessment is payable in installments, current and future installments shall be allocated between seller and buyer using the same method of proration of real estate taxes above. I think that is nice and clear. Seems to me that the future installments are automatically going to be taken on by the buyer, just as future property tax payments automatically get taken on by the buyer. But the current assessment installment is going to be prorated based on whatever you've checked above with regards to in advance or in arrears. And so we don't have an option on this of telling the seller to pay off the balance of that road assessment or whatever it may be that still has another 10 years of installments on it. And I'm supportive of that because I think that it causes too many headaches, and I think just in general the concept of, hey, the buyer is the one benefiting from the new road, so yes, that road assessment that still has another 5 years of payments, it makes sense for the buyer to take on those future payments. Obviously you can always write an addendum to change any of this content if you want the seller to pay off things entirely, but Does that cover perpetual type assessments, i.e. trash, lights, county drain? Well, yeah, so that would be the perpetual is all future payments. Cause yeah, that's very common. I've seen it where, yeah, the waste disposal, it's in the taxes every year under the assessments. Um, and so, it's something that will be paid by the future or in the future by the buyer. Those ones are even in other purchase agreements where it has the seller paying off the balance, something like that, the in perpetuity ones, there is no balance to pay off. So it's obviously then understood, because there's no other way to do it. The buyer has to be responsible for those, in my view. You don't believe perpetual are in the assessments. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I always consider like even if the trash is paid as an assessment on the taxes, that it's still rolled into the taxes and prorated like the taxes, which is essentially what this is saying too.
Well, yeah, so that year's bill, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all future ones, regardless, are gonna be buyer's responsibility. All right, prorated items, any rent, HOA dues, condo dues, or assessment installment payments not otherwise included in the tax bills. So the in perpetuity ones that aren't part of the taxes.
Anything not
Shall,
yet covered.
yeah, shall be prorated and adjusted to the date of closing. So that's making it though where those are treated as in arrears then, right? So the HOA dues,
But usually those are paid in advance.
yeah, okay.
So like a rent's paid on the first of the month, homeowner dues are typically due at the beginning of the month.
Okay.
So you'd be prorating it.
Yeah,
It
that's
would
true.
be a
Yeah,
credit to the seller for the days that the buyer's in the house.
yes. All right. Occupancy, property is, yeah. What's the point of having this in the purchase agreement? I have not actually totally understood why I've seen that in the past.
Mostly for the section down below where it says if tenants occupy the property, then either the seller will cause the tenants to vacate or buyers taking it on subject to the rights of the tenants.
Yeah, but previous purchase agreements have had this without the if tenants occupy, and I never understood the point of identifying these if there was never any relevance to it. Further on here, yes, the tenant occupied this whole section here. Then, if tenants occupy the property, I think that that's great to have in the purchase agreement. But
The other side of that would be like a security deposit, right? So if it's tenant occupied as checked and there wasn't that bottom paragraph, that at least lets the title company and everybody involved know that there is likely rent that needs to be prorated or a security deposit that might need to be transferred or
okay,
something, as well as the buyer understanding that they are taking it on with the tenant being occupied. So if this bottom section wasn't here, where you could check the seller will cause the tenants to vacate, then I think at that point, by default, the buyer's taking it subject to the rights of the tenants.
oh,
If you check
absolutely.
tenant occupied, right?
But even if you don't, I mean, like if there's a lease in place, the new buyer is obligated to honor that lease. I obviously, I mean, it makes sense to know when you're writing the offer if there is such a lease. Um, I never understood, why it matters if it's owner occupied or vacant, but no.
I think that's again a title thing, so they know whether or not which level of title coverage can be
Interesting.
which level of title coverage can be used, right? Because if it's vacant, they can't do an enhanced policy.
Right. Because you just get into the gray area of, they've moved out 80% of the furniture, but there's still a bed and somebody stays there every so often. Is it vacant? Is it owner occupied? I don't know. Just kind of, seems to me like it doesn't make a difference. But you don't want to leave these things unchecked. When you have options, you're supposed to check whatever one applies, and then check one below occupancy to be given at closing, or see the attached occupancy addendum. I think that's very smart to keep occupancy as a separate document rather than try to roll it into the purchase agreement, because it's too important of a thing to try to truncate down to a single paragraph. All right. And yeah, I think that this is a nice addition that I had not seen before. Condition. Until possession is delivered, seller agrees to keep the property in substantially the same condition as the date of this purchase agreement and agrees to maintain heating, well, septic, plumbing, electrical system, landscape irrigation system, and other equipment in normal working order, to keep the roof watertight and maintain the grounds. So yeah, the maintain the grounds was the one that Ron last time was talking about with raking leaves and shoveling snow.
Keeping the grass mowed.
Yep, keeping the grass mowed. Seller agrees to keep all utility services operating until possession is delivered. Upon vacating the property, seller agrees to remove all debris and leave the property in broom clean condition. In the event the property herein has been winterized, it shall be the obligation and expense of seller to de-winterize the property prior to closing. I think that's good to have in here. Our most likely we're representing the buyer when using this purchase agreement, and so it's good to have it be that yes, it's the seller's responsibility to de-winterize. The only issue I see with this is when it comes to things like pools and outdoor winterization that can't be de-winterized in the middle of winter. I'm dealing with one currently where there was a hot tub and it was outside and it's been winterized, and so they weren't able to test it during the inspection, and trying to de-winterize it in the middle of winter.
Did you use your pool addendum?
No, I mean it's not it's one of my agents that
There isn't a pool addendum that specifically says that inspections on pools and dewinterizing and things like that can happen much later on once they are open.
Okay, that's a good one. I've not heard of the pool addendum. It's good to know that we have that now in retrospect. All right.
I assume it would apply to hot tubs too.
Yeah. Although, I mean, things like the irrigation system, I mean, you're going to need to get those, blown out before the winter and winterized.
Right. Well, that's supposed to be kept in the same condition as current, as to when you see the property. So if you see it in the winter,
right? But I mean, if
and
it's
the irrigation
September,
system is one.
You write the offer in September, closing gets pushed back, buyer's gonna want that.
Want it to have been winterized?
Yes. Because I mean, you get to the final walkthrough and it's, now December and the ground is frozen, but it's not been winterized. I don't know. That could be
so as a seller, you risk, by not winterizing it, you risk broken pipes, damage to the property that now you're in charge of. As a buyer, if it's not been winterized, it's the same issue. So I think there's some modicum of
rational, reasonable thought here that I think the in normal working order does the heavy lifting,
right?
Where the irrigation system is normal working order winterized in the winter
in December. Yeah.
And so that is the normal working order of a irrigation system, is for it to be winterized when the ground is frozen. So So yeah, I think relying on that can be safe enough and just, reasonable person test. Fun.
The
All
other
right.
change we could make if we wanted to would be that last sentence. Instead of saying in the event the property herein, in the event the home herein has been winterized, the seller will de-winterize the home.
Yeah.
So you're not talking about the irrigation system or a pool or anything that we're talking about specifically about the home itself. But I think the reasonable person test here is might be a better one, personally.
Okay. All right. So now we're on to the walkthrough. Buyer has a right to do a walkthrough inspection of the property within 72 hours prior to closing. This walkthrough will provide buyer with an opportunity to confirm that the paragraph above has been complied with and should not be deemed an opportunity to renegotiate the terms and conditions of this purchase agreement. I think that's very legit. It's making it very clear the only way that this walkthrough reopens negotiation is if 18 has not been complied with, meaning there is some aspect to the condition that I remember one closing I had, we show up and yeah, the garage door opener was broken. So the garage could not close or open. And so yeah, it's like, okay, we need a new garage door opener mechanism, $500 thing. Because it was working at the time of inspection, but it was no longer at the time of the walkthrough.
And a big thing on this one for you guys as you represent buyers is kind of having that conversation of if we want to ensure an inspection fix has been done, this is not allow for that. It specifically says that it's in that condition. So you need to write that into
The
your inspection
addendum.
contingency, inspection addendum. It's more, again, it should be more of a way for you to have the conversation with your client of, yes, we get this final walkthrough, but it's really just to make sure that it's, the house has the roof still tight, watertight, that the electrical still works the way it's supposed to, the big things, not did they, fix that leak under the sink or not.
Well, so let's say you have a thing where, there's a window that's got a crack in it and your inspection addendum says that the seller to replace the window prior to closing. You do the walkthrough and you see that the window has not been replaced. Yeah, this doesn't reopen negotiations, but the addendum still has not been satisfied.
Correct.
So
yes.
It's not about, instituting item number 18. It's, hey, you didn't
finish
actually.
the addendum.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
All right. Utilities. Seller shall order final billings on all utilities, gas, electric, etc., as of the day of possession, not the day of closing. And seller shall pay final billings. Seller shall not direct any utilities to be disconnected. Buyer agrees to inform all utility companies of ownership and to assume and pay all billings from day of taking possession. So, do you know where my head goes as far as the gray area here? When does possession take place if seller turns in keys on Friday and the buyer doesn't pick them up until Monday? So the buyer thinks that, okay, Monday is when they need to have utilities on, but the seller turned in keys early.
The way it's been explained to me is possession happens when the seller drops off the keys, regardless of when the buyer picks them up.
Okay. And that's my view as well, but it's just one of those that, and we have a chat comment. That should be covered in the possession paragraph. Okay. Well, yeah, which will be the case when in terms of occupancy, any occupancy addendum that deals with possession after closing. Yeah, that should make it very clear as to when that actual moment of possession takes place. All right. Risk of loss. Seller is responsible for any damage to the property except for normal wear and tear until the closing or possession, whichever is later. If there is damage that the seller is unwilling or unable to repair or to arrange and pay to be repaired, buyer has the option to cancel this agreement and the EMD shall be immediately refunded to buyer, or buyer can proceed with the closing and deduct from the purchase price a fair and reasonable estimate of the cost to repair the property and assume the responsibility for the repair, thereby releasing the seller. That's a fun one. If you show up and there's a whole bunch of new damage, so buyer can still proceed with the closing, and you have to somehow come up with a fair and reasonable estimate for the cost of repairing that damage to get 18 resatisfied. Hopefully you don't have to do that too often, but it's good that it's in here because yeah, it is one of those things where it shouldn't be that the seller can just, if they want to, if a seller has changed their mind, has remorse, and they don't want to close, so they just burn down the garage and then, oh, well, they're not forced to still sell. No, yeah, this would force that seller to still sell, but the buyer would be able to deduct the cost of rebuilding a garage. So, I mean, I think that
Obviously, most likely in a scenario like that, you're going to end up in court anyways.
Right, yeah.
To argue what is a fair and reasonable price. But this does give you that ability and gives you something as an agent to lean on and argue with and say, look, we get to still do this. If you really want to take us to court, you sign that we get to still do this.
Yeah.
So take us to court. The only thing we're arguing about whether or not what we deducted is a fair or reasonable price.
Right. So yeah, put that aside in escrow and figure it out, fight it out later, but still allow the closing to occur. Because yeah, I mean, the whole point is we don't want the seller to have some workaround to be able to cancel the whole deal just because they changed their mind. And because I have heard horror stories of different things where, yeah, the seller has sabotaged their own house in order to try to get out of the deal. Buyer acceptance of condition. By closing this transaction, buyer shall be deemed to have accepted the property in as is condition at the time of closing, and it shall be deemed that by closing this transaction, buyer is satisfied with the condition of the property. Other than, whatever escrows are established and things like that. Fees or considerations. Buyer and seller hereby acknowledge that brokers may accept a fee or consideration with regard to listing agreement, buyer-broker contract, placement of a home warranty, or any other ancillary products or services arising from this transaction. Okay. Default. Failure to perform any obligation of this purchase agreement by seller or buyer shall constitute default. If buyer defaults, seller may, at seller's option, terminate the purchase agreement and pursue all available legal and equitable remedies or seek forfeiture of the deposit as liquidated damages. So that's an important or there, that if they sign the mutual release asking for the EMD and the buyer said then, the seller gets the EMD, they can't then pursue the buyer for additional damages, is my interpretation.
That is correct.
Okay. If the seller defaults, buyer may pursue all available legal and equitable remedies and may also terminate the purchase agreement and seek a refund of the deposit. So, yes, the buyer signing a release where they're trying to get
their money back,
EMD back, that is an and, not an or. So even if they get their EMD back, they can still pursue additional damages that derive from the seller defaulting. So that's important, and I mean, that's always been the case as far as I've been doing this, where a seller default is much more liability inducing than a buyer default. Heirs, successors, and assigns. This purchase agreement binds the seller, seller's personal representatives, heirs, and anyone succeeding to seller's interest in the property. Buyer shall not assign this purchase agreement without seller's prior written consent. So if the seller dies, purchase agreement is still in place. Buyer can, still moving forward with the purchase, and whoever inherits the property. The only thing that's going to really cause a kerfuffle there is if there's like probate court type situation to delay things, but probate is almost certainly going to uphold the contract, because that's the whole point of this section here. But for the buyer, if the buyer wants to assign it where they want to give somebody else the ability to step into, in place of them, and become the buyer, they can't do so without the seller's prior written consent. So wholesaling, this would not work for wholesaling, this purchase agreement. And that's good, because I don't like wholesaling, so don't do it. Release. Buyer and seller acknowledge that the brokers, their respective agents, employees, and representatives have made no representations concerning the condition of the property covered by this purchase agreement or marketability of title. Buyer and seller acknowledge that brokers, their respective agents, employees, and representatives are not acting as appraisers, builders, accountants, environmentalists, engineers, surveyors, inspectors, tax advisors, or attorneys. Buyer agrees they are not relying on any representation or statement made by seller or any real estate agent regarding any aspect of the property or this transaction, except as may be expressly set forth in this purchase agreement, a written addendum amendment, or a disclosure statement separately signed by seller. So that basically says, hey, we as agents are not responsible for anything about the property. We don't know if the home was actually built in 1970. Public record says yes, seller may say yes. It's not our job to know with certainty, to 1970 we were there, we can verify it was built in 1970. Likewise, we stay in our lane as real estate professionals. We are not environmentalists. We are not their tax advisors. We can't, tell them, hey, by purchasing this, you're going to get a great tax break and all these things. No, that we are contractually obligated to stay in our lane and not veer off into any of these things. Our buyer contract says it, our listing contract says it, and the purchase agreement says it. So if you have clients that pressure you to do things beyond your expertise, you can make it very clear to them that you are not allowed. You're contractually constrained to not do anything beyond, that pretends you have an expertise that you do not have. And we are not expected, nor should we try to be, accountants and environmentalists in that regard. And then the buyer agrees they're not relying on any word of mouth things that are told to them by the seller or an agent. They get to do their due diligence to verify anything and everything. And only the stuff that is in writing are things that they are relying upon. I think that's, a good release paragraph. Am I missing anything?
Nope.
Okay. Limitation. Buyer and seller agree any and all claims and or lawsuits which they may have against the brokers, their respective agents, employees, and representatives relating to their services must be filed no more than 6 months after the date of closing of the transaction described in this purchase agreement. Buyer and seller waive any statute of limitations to the contrary. It's a nice one, because normally it's a year. So this kind of shortens things down in half. So that, yes, they have 6 months if they want to file a lawsuit. not a year. Regardless of what the statute of limitations says, they're signing a contract agreeing to shorten their rights for lawsuits. Electronic signatures and communication. Buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that this purchase agreement, any amendment or modification of this purchase agreement, and or any written notice or communication in connection with this purchase agreement may be delivered to seller in care of listing broker and buyer in the care of the selling. Hold on.
If it basically, I know it's a little confusing the way it's worded, but delivering it to your listing broker
Oh, now I see it.
delivers
Okay,
it to
may be
the
delivered
seller.
to seller in care of listing broker and buyer in care of the selling broker via electronic mail or by facsimile. Any such communication shall be deemed delivered at the time it is sent or transmitted. The parties agree that the electronic signatures and initials shall be deemed to be valid and binding upon the parties as if the original signatures or initials were present in the documents in the handwriting of each party. So the represents and warrants an electronic email address has been provided to the listing broker from which seller may receive electronic mail. That's an interesting one because every so often we have clients that don't have email for the purpose of e-signing. So if we had them hand sign this document, we would ideally, it's supposed to be, like crossing this off if they don't have an email address. Buyer represents and warrants an electronic email address has been provided to selling broker. Likewise, yes. So if you're dealing with a client that doesn't have email, be sure to cross this off. Those people are always fun. Yeah, pretty standard. All right, stipulation for electronic storage of instruments and documents. This is new. The undersigned seller hereby stipulates and acknowledges that all documents relating to this agreement and all records and correspondence relating thereto, whether now existing or created hereafter, may be stored as electronic images and the originals of the electronically stored documents may be destroyed. The electronic images shall be deemed to serve as the original documents thereafter. I mean, that makes sense that we don't have to keep our physical copy of all the files for 7 years like we've done in the past. I mean, it's maybe still best practice to do so, but that file from 15 years ago, it's safe. You can shred it now.
Well, no, because the file from 15 years ago probably doesn't have this in it.
Well, yeah, but no,
But 15 years from now, you can.
although my understanding was we were only obligated to hold on to the physical files for 7 years. At least that's what the team leader that I worked for always told me. And so then I'd see her out there burning old files every so often. I don't know.
I just mean if this part isn't in there, don't go
Right.
burning old files.
Yes. All right, counterparts. This purchase agreement may be signed in any number of counterparts with the same effect as if the signature of each counterpart were upon the same instrument. That one's always fun.
We got too many addendums, otherwise you guys would have really long purchase agreements, even longer than this.
Wait, is that your what is your interpretation of? Because I've been on all of these trainings, I've been interpreting that to mean a very specific thing. What do you think counterparts means?
I always took it to mean any part of addendums. It can be signed as different pages. It can be signed at different times. It's all part of the same document.
Okay. That
What was your interpretation?
No, yours makes a lot more sense. It's referring to, I had always thought if it's multiple parties that had to sign the document, and so then you give the same exact form to one party, like let's say you have two different sellers and you have one seller sign it physically, but then you've mailed another copy to another seller and they sign that. As long as the documents are identical, you can combine the fact that they signed physically different contracts, but they're the same contract, and so you can combine their signatures. That was always my interpretation of this, but maybe I'm just foolish.
I think that would also apply, but I'd have to check with Bill on that.
Okay. But it also makes sense that this could just, counterparts could just be referring to additional addenda. All right. The parties to this transaction acknowledge that they are bound by the requirements of FERPTA and that the required addendum affidavit shall be prepared and executed to determine the amount required to be withheld from a foreign seller's proceeds, if any. Okay. FinCEN, yay! It's in here. Section 1010.821 of Chapter 31 of the Code of Federal Regulations Code requires that certain residential real estate transactions purchased with all cash or without institutional lender financing, where at least one buyer transferee is a legal entity, trust. Is this supposed to be trust or trust?
Trust.
Okay, because
Typo.
that's a very different thing. Trustee or other non-natural person must be reported to the United States Treasury, and I would assume United States Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So 2 typos in that one. If this transaction,
copy-paste.
if this transaction is subject to the FinCEN report, then seller and buyer shall, no later than closing, provide to the company conducting the closing the information and documentation necessary to enable the closing company to complete the FinCEN report. Such information and documentation includes full legal name, date of birth, residential street address, and the IRS taxpayer identification number of the beneficial owners of the buyer as further defined and described in the code. Buyer shall also pay all costs and fees to prepare and file the FinCEN report. Okay, so this is binding the seller as well as the buyer to provide to the title company all the necessary information. I mean, it includes a lot, things beyond just this. This is just what the sellers basically need. All right. But yeah, I think that's legit. And then it's important if you do get an offer, or if you're, to be able to know if you're on the listing side and you receive this offer, what are the sellers agreeing to? In this case, they're agreeing to fill out a form. And just like when the sellers are agreeing to provide clean title, they can't later not do that because they've agreed in this purchase agreement to provide that information. All right. 32. This is a legally binding document, and both buyer and seller acknowledge that they have been advised to consult an attorney to protect their interest in this transaction. Where the transaction involves financial and tax consequences, the parties acknowledge that they have been advised to seek the advice of their accountant or financial advisor. So now the additional terms, conditions to check if applicable. Agency disclosure form attached. Always do that. Seller's disclosure form received. Only check that if you've actually received this at the time of the writing the offer. You don't want to check that having never, having not received it, just assuming you're going to get it later. No, you don't have to have this box checked for this to be a binding, legit offer. It's fine if, whatever the truth is. If you don't have it, don't check that box. Same with lead-based paint. Only check it if you've already received it. All right, escrow agent shall retain $300 from seller at closing for water sewer charges to date of possession, if applicable. When the final bill is paid, any unused portion will be returned to the seller. I think that is nice that this is here and not, boilerplate higher up when it comes to the utility, because then it gives you the option whether or not to check it, rather than having to strike it from the boilerplate if it happens to be a well and septic. Subject property is serviced by a well and or septic system. See attached well and or septic addendum. All right, this offer is contingent on the sale closing of buyer's property. See attached property sale contingency addendum. This is a backup offer. See attached backup offer addendum. So we're going to go through all three of these next Monday. I think would be a good opportunity for that. Appraisal. This purchase agreement is subject to the property appraising at the purchase price or higher, said appraisal to be paid for by buyer. If property does not appraise at purchase price or higher, buyer shall have the option to declare this purchase agreement null and void, and deposit shall be returned to buyer. Doesn't give the seller the right to just say, hey, I'll come down to the purchase price. That's okay.
I mean, you can always negotiate. That's always an option.
Well, but if the seller is willing, if it appraised 5,000 lower and the seller's willing to come down, this does give the buyer the option to say, nope, too bad. I don't care that you're willing to come down.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Subject property abuts a private road, which has not been accepted as a public road and is not required to be maintained by the county road commission or other public or municipal body. I see this and I check it when it applies, but I don't know why. Is it just a liability sake, cover ourselves that the buyer's acknowledging what the road is?
No, this actually has a couple of different purposes. So one is going to be, obviously, if it's a private road, then you should have a, what's it called?
Private road agreement, yeah.
Private road agreement. It's also an acknowledgement for the buyer that there is potentially some additional cost to maintaining said road because it is not maintained by a municipal body. So it's not just in here for information, but it does give you the heads up of, somehow this road is being maintained. If it's not public, someone's paying for it. So either it's in a road agreement or, mutual agreement of neighbors. Things like that.
Okay. And HOAs are not considered public bodies?
HOAs are not public bodies.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right. Offer is voidable. Thank you. Thank you. Those 4 letters. So much better. Offer is voidable, not void, but voidable if not accepted by date and time, Eastern time. Because yes, I mean, it's just silly to have in there that offer is void if not accepted by, and then the sellers come back a day after the date and sign it, and technically speaking, it's too late. Well, here it's voidable, meaning that the buyer can back out if it was not accepted by that date and time. All right.
So you don't have to keep doing extensions on your purchase agreements.
Right. And I mean, I never did one in my life, and I just always, ignored the fact that it would say void rather than voidable and treated it as voidable. All right, closing of this purchase to be on or before at listing broker's office or location of seller's choice. Yeah, that's fair. All right. And so that is and we don't need any language about that being a target, but not a firm like, oh, seller can cancel it all if it's not met type date. I mean, because I know
depends on the reason, because there is some built in earlier in this contract.
Well, yeah, with the financing, and that's why I would recommend putting this as the aspirational. Oh, hold on, let's see what our stuff says here. Ooh, Fran actually pointed out that the up here for the 300.
I'm happy to make that a blank.
Yeah.
You guys can fill it in with whatever you need it to be.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Okay, so yeah, at closing 300 or more, if is what the Flint purchase agreement looks like. Yeah, I think having it be a blank and allowing the buyer's agent to.
I've seen it all. I mean, I've seen PAs where it's 300. I've seen PAs where it's 500. I've seen them, so I don't, having it be a blank you guys fill in is fine
Yeah.
from a legal
Um,
standpoint.
but yeah, so my view then is for this one here, the closing of this purchase to be on or before, that should be the aspirational target, 30 days, whatever. But I would, when it comes to the financing, I would build in more than just those 30 days. Section. Yeah, I would put 40 days in here to give yourself a little bit of a buffer if you need an extra week beyond this. Because the financing one explicitly says that the seller has the ability to cancel the deal. This one doesn't give the seller that ability to cancel the deal. It just says that closing will be on or before that.
Well, if you don't close on or before that, at that point you've defaulted, so the default paragraph applies.
Okay.
Because you've not satisfied one of the terms of the contract. If you are failure to perform any obligation of the purchase agreement, so an obligation of the purchase agreement is closing on or before whatever date you put there. So
But
failure to do that
that could be
activates the
both
default.
parties who failed to perform.
You're correct, in which case the default paragraph applies to both.
All right. That's always
This is a legally binding contract. If you say you
no.
are closing on or before a certain date, that is legally binding.
I just it's such a weird one that the courts treat this as only a target and not giving the seller the ability to say, oh, we want to go with some other sale instead because this date is come and gone. I don't really understand how the courts reach that conclusion other than to me it's the right conclusion, but I don't understand legally how they get there when the plain language is as you are saying that you're in default if you don't close by this date. But hey, I'm happy that the courts have ruled that because I don't want a deal to get canceled because the buyer needs a 4-day extension. I literally have that going on right now where the buyer's lender they lied about a clear to close. I've never had them lie about a clear to close, but we needed an extension because of it. All right. Home warranty excluded, included, to be paid for by blank. Cost of home warranty not to exceed blank.
An extra box there.
So you would only do the home warranty excluded if they were originally offering it with the listing, right? You would do home warranty included to be paid for by, but if you're asking for the seller to pay for the home warranty, you don't want it to just be that it doesn't exceed an amount. You want it to also be at minimum an amount. Because you don't want a $200 home warranty that doesn't really actually provide any coverage. No? Am I foolish on this one?
I mean, there's only so many options to a home warranty.
Right. But there's some crap home warranties out there.
I mean, I think even the ones you pay a lot for, some might
True.
deem that way. But the issue here is more the seller can't, to make the offer competitive, you're telling the seller, look, we're not going to ask you to pay more than X. But typically it's the buyer putting forth well, at least when I send these offers, I include the home warranty I'm asking for in my offer. So I'll send the home warranty sheet checked off.
I'm off base here, but what if instead, to be paid for by blank, cost of home warranty not to exceed. Home warranty included seller to contribute blank towards warranty of buyer's choice. Where then you're putting in the amount that you're asking, or seller to contribute up to blank towards, so if you put $500 in there, but it only costs $495, then, they only pay
Do you
for
not
it.
include the home warranty you're asking for when you send an offer?
To be honest, my standard practice is I don't ask for warranties up front. I have that in my back pocket as a way to try to resolve inspection concerns.
Anyone else want to chime in on this one and what they think?
If I've ever asked for a home warranty, I just turn around and know exactly what I want to spend, not to exceed a certain amount of money. No, when I ask for one, I never buy one in advance. I just say I'd like, and to be honest with you, usually I use the home warranty in a counter. I don't go for it right at the very beginning. I go for it after some negotiation and to kind of maybe even things up a little bit. But
So
I
kind
mean,
of a
I have no
moot point
problem.
having it in the PA.
Oh, I have no problem with, I think it's wonderful being in the PA because it's an option. I mean, it's included. You want it included or you don't. If you don't want it, you just move past it. But then,
Right.
of course, if you did say when you wrote up the purchase agreement and you did ask, you said, okay, originally I'm putting this offer together, but we're not asking you for it. Then when you do negotiate, if it comes back to you and they counter, then that obviously portion would change because then you would do an addendum that states, we would like you to,
Right.
seller to pay for a home warranty up to a price of this. And
Right.
but I like it the way that it is. It gives you everything that you could possibly want. If you don't want to use it, you don't use it.
All right. I'm
It's
satisfied.
I'll put a
better
note
than
in
have
there.
more than not enough.
So, and I mean, I've seen many purchase agreements written like this. If we have the freedom, I wanted to at least scrutinize and see if, is there a better way? All right, attorney package of the closing documents required at least 3 days prior to closing. So if your buyer has an attorney, you don't often get closing docs 3 days prior to closing, but that's why if your buyer is going to require it, yeah, check the box here. All right, FHA or VA financing addendum required, see attached addendum. Arbitration addendum attached. So there's nothing built in to this contract about arbitration, up front. It's only if you're opting into arbitration, you have to do the addendum. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I've seen arbitration built into so many purchase agreements, and so just being clear that this is not one of those purchase agreements that has an arbitration clause already included. If you leave it this way, remove the long line and put check boxes for seller and buyer.
Yeah.
Yep.
I see that, Shelley. I can do that.
Yep. All right, and then other addendums attached. So we don't really need the buyer broker compensation addendum because that's what we've been putting on this line lately, but we don't need that anymore because it's built in. I have to remember a couple days ago.
Just above there.
Just above number 5.
It's number 5.
Yes. So yeah, and that's helpful that rather than a whole additional page for us to get paid, we have it built in. And so, yeah, we don't need to have that one here. We could still have our specific contingencies addendum, but a lot of those items have been kind of built in here. But yeah, you would maybe want to do like a condominium addendum, that sort of thing. The pool addendum, as I now
Pool
know
addendum.
we have apparently. An escalation clause addendum, potentially, if you're in a bidding war. Land Division Act for unplanted land only. Is this required in our purchase agreements? Because to me, this is one that just never really comes into play, and it takes up a lot of real estate here on the page for something that just doesn't apply. 99%
I mean, if
of the time.
you've had someone buy a piece of property that could be split and you did not select all, then you're hurting your buyer.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so just always
This
check
is
all.
one, yeah.
Okay. All right. Other terms. conditions?
That the last line on there, if you scroll up just a little bit, was an important one from our title company.
If the
If
number
the
of
number of
divisions.
division, is not specified on the deed will grant the buyer the right to all divisions. So that is the kind of catch-all and how it has been currently.
Okay, and so if you don't check this box, this kind of overrides it as automatically default into that?
Assuming it's not elsewhere specified in the deed, right?
Okay.
So like if the deed I already have that I am giving you says it can be split 4 times or whatever, and I didn't check all, then it's already specified in the deed. So I still get the 4. That makes sense.
Okay,
Or reverse that.
all right, but our standard practice, we should always be doing
All right to split the property, Rob.
Oh yeah, all divisions, yep, splits, doesn't say that, wait. All. Oh, yeah, okay, you check all, specific number, as appropriate divisions, all divisions, all as
Yes.
appropriate divisions. Yeah, okay, so that's what so you're saying grantee the right to make all as appropriate divisions? All divisions down here. I guess the strangeness is the as appropriate.
Yeah. I think it's as appropriate under the law, but I'll double check that.
Okay.
Some of these were copied, like I said, from existing ones that we use.
Yeah, yep. All right, so we have our other terms, conditions. You got enough space there for like a escalation if you wanted to try to put it in.
Fran, there is a checkbox for that in the big checkbox section.
Let's see what her question is.
Appraisal.
Oh, yeah, are we including property should appraise? Yep. Right here, appraisal. Which is why we don't use the Michigan Realtor purchase agreement, because they don't mention the appraisal anywhere in it, and that just mind-boggling. All right, entire agreement. Buyer and seller agree to the following. The term purchase agreement as used herein includes any counter offers made by the parties to which there has been mutual and final acceptance. This purchase agreement and any addenda constitutes the entire agreement between the parties. There are no other written or oral understandings between the parties. This purchase agreement supersedes any and all prior purchase agreements, understandings, or representations made by the sellers or their agents. Time is of the essence. I don't know why that it's just kind of pigeonhole, or like the time is of the essence seems irrelevant to everything that preceded it, but that's okay. buyer signature and acknowledgement of receipt, they hereby makes this offer with terms and conditions contained herein and acknowledges receiving a copy of this agreement. So make sure you give your clients a copy of what they're signing. So now seller can choose to check this box. Seller hereby agrees to the terms. Seller acknowledge receiving copy, so they can check that, or they can check this, saying it's a counter offer. Modifications have been made to the agreement either here or in an attached addendum, and it is returned to the buyer as a counter offer. This counter offer will expire on blank or upon receipts of revocation from seller, whichever is earlier. All right, so what's the chat say? Modification needs an S. Yeah, modifications. This counter offer will, yeah, we already did that. All right, so buyer acceptance of counter offer. Buyer signature below acknowledges receipt of the seller's signed counter offer and constitutes a final acceptance of said counter offer.
So this is not what you guys typically see as a bottom line. This is
Right.
actually only if there is a counter offer that needs to be signed. So there is not what we see sometimes as being a generic bottom line that the buyer needs to sign.
Am I able to sway you into getting rid of these initial boxes down here? Those ones always struck me as unnecessary when, yes, you need to have the client's initial each page, but then when they're signing this page, they shouldn't also have to initial down here, but if they don't initial, then that just causes problems. And so I would rather just did not have the initial boxes on there because this is a page in which they're signing.
The hard part there is that it is in a footer. That is my only option for doing it. And my only option for having a different footer is on page 1.
Okay, gotcha. Fair enough.
So while yes, I agree, it is probably not perfect. There's no other way for me to fit the initials on all the other pages and not have it on the last page without
Right, yep.
significant manual modification.
Yeah. Cause it also just, I don't like that it's, underneath the acceptance of counter offer, like, I don't know, but that's okay. It doesn't really matter. So that, then we've made it through. But we still have then additional addenda for us to go through next time, which will be next Monday, at 4:00. And then we can open it up to any additional questions that people have. Going back to tax prorations, I know Genesee was left off, but if you're going to list counties, you're forgetting that up here we also sell in Lapeer, Shiawassee, Tuscola, Saginaw. They're all paid in advance, but do you want to include them for someone's benefit? I appreciate that,
Absolutely.
Kelly. Yes.
Yes.
Because I mean, that's the whole. We don't need to include all 83 counties of Michigan, but
No.
anything
Where we typically work, I'd like to be
Yes.
included.
Yeah, our service area, it makes sense. It's down here.
So Lapeer, Shiawassee, Tuscola, and Saginaw.
But yeah, and so I don't know if any of the attendees have any last questions about anything you were expecting to maybe be on it that isn't. Obviously, with it being divided over 2 days, it may be difficult to remember the totality of it all.
Yeah, Fran, we were listing the counties just for a knowledge thing so that, when you're going through this and filling it out, if you're in one of these counties, you're likely in advance. In one of the other counties, you're likely in the rears.
Yeah. And obviously, capitalize the C and commonly to be consistent across them. But it's also then saying commonly used, not, definitively used. So it's giving us guidance, but it's still on us as agents to verify what we want our tax proration to be.
And on occasion, I also use the other box. just to reinforce the county that the property is located in. So I do that, but I just really want to tell you that I think it looks nice and clean, very legible. It's not scrunched together. That's what and I'm really looking forward to seeing the addendums and having all the addendums in one place.
Fran, that's an
Yeah,
interesting situation where the summer was in arrears and winter was in advance.
it's a great option for using that other checkbox.
Yes, yeah.
I do know that exists. I remember reading about it. Forgot. That is a great reason to have that other checkbox in there.
Yeah.
I tried to make it easy for you guys, but I was overruled by Bill on just saying build based on the municipality in which the property resides.
Right.
I was overruled.
Macomb County, I don't see it on the list. That's another one though that I don't know, we've sold stuff in Macomb. Don't recommend it. It's a long drive. All right. Well,
Shelley, are you talking about like the HOA required the seller to pay it off in full, whereas in the other one it could be transferred? Interesting.
oh, so if the HOA requires
It to be paid by the
an
seller,
assessment to
even
be
if
paid in full, then I would argue current and future installments shall be allocated between buyer and seller using the same. There is no future installment if the assessment being levied by the HOA outlines that if at any point when property is transferred, those future installments become doable on the seller, that then turns those future assessments into not future assessments, just by the nature of them in their creation from the HOA. So I would say that the HOA overrules this.
Yeah, I would say actually having it written up in there that is something that may happen, because I would suspect a seller may not know that the HOA would require it to be paid off if they have been paying it in installments or spread out over 5 years. And that would be an important thing for the seller to note, is that there is the possibility that if the HOA requires this to be paid off, that I have, as a seller, have to pay it off. Yeah, so I think having a line, I agree. I think having a line in there somewhere about HOA assessment, somewhere in that special assessment section, the HOA assessment being called out separately as something that may or may not be required to be paid off by the HOA. It's not something we get the choice to negotiate on or anything like that. So I think I can add a sentence in there to cover us there.
Well, I mean, because regardless, like, doesn't really matter what the purchase agreement says. The purchase agreement doesn't override the HOA rules in that regard, where the seller could come to the HOA and be like, well, no, I don't have to pay it off because I signed this purchase agreement saying that the buyer will take on the future installments. HOA is going to say, too bad, you got to pay it off.
Right, but do you want to have that conversation with your seller when you're signing a purchase agreement, or 2 days in front of the closing table when you realize they have to pay it off?
Okay.
So, like, one of the things that I thought about as I was going through this is being able to talk to your clients about these things that we might not always ask questions about. Shelley, I would have never thought that an HOA would require an assessment that is normally paid off in installments or over the course of 5 years, require for it to be paid off prior to the home being sold. I would have never thought that was a thing. So having a line in here so that when I'm going over a PA with my sellers saying, hey, we should probably double check this because this could cost you $2 or $3 grand that we're not planning on it costing you. I think does it change whether or not the seller has to pay it at the end? No, but it makes that conversation happen at a point where we can now take that into consideration with accepting this purchase agreement or not.
Yes. All right. Yeah, I do like that, using this for that purpose of prompting us to, come up with the things that we're supposed to be asking our clients when we're.
Or things that we just need to think about, right? So like on the buy side, that doesn't really matter. But on the listing side, if I were to get this PA and see that, it would prompt me to ask, ooh, I wonder if this assessment that we know you have really can be transferred or not.
Yeah.
I should probably ask the HOA before you accept this agreement, knowing you're going to have to pay it off. Obviously, it doesn't matter which agreement I accept, you're going to have to pay it off, but it might change what I'm willing to accept. I do want to say I really appreciate you guys getting on this and going through this with us. It has been invaluable to hear your perspectives on things and what's that like when we're going through this and we see a section and we're missing a county, or we have an HOA thing that I've never encountered. Y'all's knowledge is invaluable in this process. So thank you for taking the time to jump on these calls with us and go over this. We'll make some minor modifications here to account for some of the things we've talked about. I'll hopefully have Bill get them all signed off on by the end of the week so I can get them submitted to the correct forms locations. I do want to mention, like, I know we're going to go over a bunch of the addendums and stuff like that. I have rewritten almost all of ours. We are not going to be sending them all to SkySlope and stuff in one giant push, because we do want to go over them with you guys like this before we do. So we'll get the PA up there. We'll get any ones up there that weren't modified. The terms weren't modified of. It was just me fixing the letterhead or something like that. But the new pool or the new, the new well and septic addendum, things like that, I'm not going to submit until we've had a chance to go over them for this very reason. So would love for you guys to continue to come and go over those in case we have modifications. There are some significant changes in them, in a couple of them.
All right. Well, yes.
Oh no, don't tell me I'm watching it tonight on repeat.
Do any of the spaces have character limitations? That's going to be a situation with regards to each, like SkySlope, and that's going to be formatting that's built into the signing system, not this document. Obviously, the document only has the space limitation of how much room on the page, but as to whether or not, like if you copy and paste the legal description into the line where it says legal description, some transaction systems cut off after so many characters, others shrink the text down to get it to fit in the space. That's going to be based on whatever system you use. Will you be sending out a copy just in case our oh, yes.
Yes. All of the new contracts, as they get finalized and approved, and as we've gone over them like this, will also be posted up in Workspace in a PDF form. So if you guys need them, they will all be up there for you at any point in time that you may need them outside of your signing systems.
Thank you, Rob. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to end the recording.
And I've actually got to hop off. I was supposed to have another meeting at 4. So
okay. All right.
I will chat with you guys again soon.